here is Erin Jordan with the Gazette.
Thanks, Katie. Yeah, I am the Gazette's investigative reporter, and I have the pleasure of moderating several panels at the Iowa Ideas Conference, all in the energy and environment track. So, this is the first panel of the first day of the conference. So that's tremendous that we have such a great lineup. So talking about rebuilding the power grid kind of looks at what happened and what is happening after the August 10th derecho swept through Iowa, and particularly eastern Iowa and Cedar Rapids were very hard hit. But it can, we have lots of times, lots of storms throughout the year and other occurrences that call for rebuilding aspects of the power grid. So I want to ask our panelists to briefly introduce themselves and to, kind of quantify to some degree what damage your utility sustained during the derecho.
This is Dan Custer at MidAmerican Energy. Since I was shown at the top of the list, I guess I'll go first, and appreciate the opportunity to speak and listen and learn and answer questions with the group here. So MidAmerican Energy, we serve about 790,000 customers system-wide. About 90% of those are within the state of Iowa. Certainly we experienced a very large impact from this storm, over 280,000 customers affected at peak. I think if you look at just the Iowa side of things, it was above 220,000 Iowa customers affected. So a huge impact for the company and most importantly, our customers. My role as general manager of system control and grid technology, I'm responsible for all of our real-time operators. So those are the folks that are monitoring the grid, both the transmission side of the grid and the distribution side of the grid, dispatching the crews and working with them to switch and isolate damaged parts of our system, and then allow the undamaged parts of the system to restore customers, and then establish safe working boundaries for the work that needs to be performed during the storm response, so our crews can safely do repairs and then get the damaged parts of the grid back online. So as far as the damage side, we had over 60 different transmission lines impacted. We had over 260 different circuits impacted. Very large scale effort, all hands on deck in terms of the response to restore customers in our hardest hit areas, which were Des Moines, Iowa City, and the Quad Cities. So as Erin indicated, the eastern half of the state is where things really started to pick up for us. I think that's it for my intro.
Okay, well, maybe I'll go.
Go ahead, Joel.
Erin, because I think really the next three of us all are kind of pretty much the same epicenter. Alliant Energy relies on ITC Midwest for our transmission service. So for customers in our area that May and I will talk about, it's really been a combined effort. So I'll go first, May, and then I think Dusky can add on that transmission perspective, which we were all part of that larger team. So first, I want to thank the Gazette, the sponsors, and especially the audience here. As I'm looking through the names, see many friends, colleagues. A lot of you were part of that larger team that we utilized addressing the derecho, which was for many of us, and those of you that read my bio, working into my fourth decade into this industry, something like we have never seen before. I couldn't be prouder of our company, our employees, the industry as a whole, and more importantly, our community, the great state of Iowa, and specifically here, Lynn County and Cedar Rapids, for your patience, collaboration, and assistance as we took on this daunting challenge. And frankly, I think amazed all of ourselves how quickly we could recover from it. A little bit, my bio's out there. I'm an Iowan, born here. I've spent the bulk of my career here. I've chosen Alliant Energy, this industry in Cedar Rapids, to make home, and I couldn't be prouder of that. During the Derecho, I was probably one of the all hands on deck. As you can tell from my bio, I've got a lot of varied experience, but my day-to-day is not directly related to the service perspective, but I really took on two roles that I'll talk about or through the Q&A. One was served as company spokesman person for the Lynn County, Cedar Rapids area. As ed messaging, and I want to thank the media and everybody else that kept that very fluid message flowing into our community and helping both for the safety and comfort of our citizens in some very trying times, as well as I was part of the Lynn County Emergency Operations Center out at Kirkwood. I'm going through it. And again, so many great memories of great people doing great work in very challenging times. So as I said, couldn't be more grateful for everybody, that large team, including crews from across the country, across the continent. We had a lot of Canadians in here helping with it, and that unbelievable understanding that we got from our customers. If you have time, please go out to social media and some other places. We've put together some really heart, at least they've touched my heart pretty deeply. And most of the people I've talked to really shows the grit and the compassion of our community. So spend a few minutes and look at that. Very good. To the storm, our purpose is to serve customers and build strong communities. So we knew the minutes as the storm was coming through and after, and May will give a little bit more direct on that. We were called, this is what we're here for. And that once electricity was provided, so many more options for recovery started opening up and everybody could do it. As we know, the weather system came through with hurricane-like forces of 140 plus mile an hour winds, but without the normal warning of hurricanes where you can do evacuations and a lot of other buttoning down the hatches. At its peak, over half of our Iowa-based customers were without power, and virtually all of Lynn County and Cedar Rapids was without power. That's over 256,000 customers. This damage went from Ames to Marshalltown to Grinnell to Newton, the Cedar Rapids and Clinton. And for those of us Iowans, just think the Highway 30 corridor from, past the midpoint of the state on the western side all the way to the river. There was significant damage to the transmission system, which I'm sure Dusky will talk about. In terms of outage minutes, which is really how we look at it. So that's how many minutes you did not have our product as our customers. The 2007 ice storm was twice as large as the flood of 2008. The 2020 Derecho was 3 times larger in scale than the 2007 ice storm. As I said, we had hurricane force winds. Restoration was unlike any of us we have seen. The tree damage was a huge challenge. Many relief workers told us that many times in the hurricane areas, the trees don't get very big because they're removed so often. But when you think about the Cedar Rapids century-old tree canopy coming into a system, that's what we had to do and work with. I want to also say, we know the job's not done. There's a lot more restoration. We're part of that. That's really part of our building stronger communities. We were happy to be one of the starting companies, and I thank everyone else, individually companies that has been part of Project Reconnect to, again, help our citizens. We have over $300,000 available for that, and that's from personal contributions from our employees, from our foundation, from our retirees, our board of directors, our larger family, and thank the United Way and others for that. We also knew throughout this, a lot of the lessons we learned in the work from home or COVID, we put to immediate work in reaching out to all of our customer groups. With that, I'm going to turn it over to May Farlinger, who was our front line on this. A little background on May. I unduly take credit for bringing May into our organization. I was smart enough a few years ago, for those of you that can't see the video, few in quotes, bringing May on as an intern to our company, and couldn't be prouder. I know this was a huge challenge for her and her work group, but as an executive, it gave me great comfort to know we had May and her team working this with all of the tools from, decades ago, being at maps and, old-fashioned phone calls and whiteboards to the newest technology. This has been an industry that has always embraced new ideas and innovation, and I couldn't have been prouder of the team. So with that, maybe if you could dig it a little bit deeper on the numbers and the personal experience we had. Thank you.
Sure can. Thanks, Joel. My name is May Farlinger. I'm the Director of Operations here on the east side of Iowa. So my service territory spans from Cedar Rapids over to Clinton and down to the Keokuk area. As Joel mentioned, Cedar Rapids was really the epicenter of this storm. I was born and raised in Cedar Rapids, and so when this storm came through, personally, it hurt. It was devastating to see what the landscape looked like days and weeks after that storm went through. And I'm sure many of you can relate to that as well. The day of the storm, I was actually here. I'm at our operating center on Shaver Road. We had just a few hours worth of notice, and that's the benefit on being on this side of the state. Usually storms go from east to west, and I got some fair warning from my colleagues on the western side of the state. Still not enough time. As Joel mentioned, when hurricanes hit the south, they've got days of notice to mobilize individuals, to set up housing, food, all of those logistics that maybe we would take for granted, but that was a big concerted effort on our part as we worked this storm. So I was here. The building itself sustained some very significant damage. About 3/4 of our roof blew off the facility. It was in our parking lot. We had gates that were damaged. We've got gates on both the north and south side. Both of those were torn apart. So that's how trucks get in and out of this facility. As a result of the roof blowing off, we had ceiling tiles that were saturated with water and falling from the ceiling. We had a natural gas leak in the facility that had to be controlled. So after this thing passed through, after we accounted for all of our folks to ensure that they were safe and their families were safe, we then had a monumental challenge in front of us about where we work this storm from. And some of those early conversations were happening in tandem. Let's find a different location if we need to. Let's contact our facilities group and see if they can tell us the structural integrity of the building. We were fortunate enough to be able to stay in this building and work this storm. Joel mentioned some of the numbers, but we had 341 communities in Iowa that were impacted, over 256,000 customers without power. In Cedar Rapids, for the first time ever, not a single customer had electricity. That was a pretty eerie feeling as I left the office late Monday night to drive through Cedar Rapids and not a single light was on. We knew we had days, weeks worth of work ahead of us, and I was just so privileged to work alongside a very talented team. And the support that we received from those that came to help us, the support from ITC and SIPCO, some of our partners there, along with our customers that were just so patient and showed us grace. We couldn't have thanked them more. So I look forward to the conversation today. I look forward to your questions, Erin. Thank you.
Thank you. Dusky?
Sorry, I was having trouble with my mute button there. Good morning, everyone. My name is Dusky Terry. I'm president of ITC Midwest, and I too want to thank the Gazette for hosting this forum and this opportunity to talk about the issues facing Iowa. And this is a good one. And I'm happy to see a lot of familiar faces out there joining us for the panel this morning. I thought I'd start with a little background on ITC Midwest and our role in the electric utility industry. We are an independent electric transmission company. We don't own any electric generation, and we don't serve retail customers directly. So our customers are distribution utilities like Alliant Energy, rural electric cooperatives, and municipal utilities. We currently own, operate, and maintain 6,700 miles of transmission line. And to give you a sense, that's enough line really to span clear across North America. So if you ran a transmission line from Anchorage, Alaska, all the way down to Panama City, Panama, that's how much transmission that we maintain in the Midwest region. And the bulk of that, of course, is here in Iowa. So our company was formed in December 2007 when ITC purchased the existing transmission system from Alliant Energy. Since that time, ITC Midwest has made $3.7 billion in capital investments to update and upgrade the transmission system. Our investments have decreased outages on average by 63%, and the result is a much more reliable and resilient transmission system today. Now, having said that, it's still no match for 140 mile per hour wind gusts and sustained winds in excess of 70 miles per hour. And I have to say the magnitude of this derecho cannot be overstated. This was a storm like no storm ITC had ever seen before. with severe and widespread damage to our transmission system. We've likened it to a 40-mile wide tornado that stayed on the ground for a 200-mile stretch across the central part of Iowa, mainly along Highway 30, as Joel mentioned. The impact was immediate and far-reaching. We activated ITC's Emergency Operations Center that Monday afternoon, even before the storm left the state. And we did that to begin assessing the damage, identifying our priorities, and putting poles in the ground and wires back in the air. This derecho dealt us many serious challenges right out of the gate. To give an example, we had the Duane Arnold power plant that had lost outside power. We had the greater Cedar Rapids area, our largest load center, that had been ravaged by the storm and wiped out all of the transmission service. We had the city of Ames that had lost their primary and secondary transmission service lines and were within a few hours of losing their water supply to the entire city if power wasn't restored. We had down lines on railroad trains and tracks, and we were receiving reports from the field that people were trapped in their vehicles with down power lines. And this was the assessment just as the storm was still leaving the state. All told, ITC Midwest had 145 transmission lines that spanned roughly 2,100 miles in 26 Iowa counties that were out of service as a result of this storm. At the peak, we had 783 line service personnel working to restore service in Iowa. And that's more than 3 times our normal line crew numbers for an average outage. And many of those came in from across the country, just like the other utilities here. We replaced more than 1,000 wood and steel poles as a result of this storm alone, which is an amazing feat in and of itself. I mean, we don't keep that kind of inventory on hand. So this type of storm response really takes time and careful coordination to pull off. This historic storm pushed the limits of our crews, our operation team, and our leadership. We were incredibly thankful for the tremendous work by everyone involved to safely restore power to Iowans. The mobilization of employees, contractor crews, and materials and resources, and the tremendous collaboration by all of the utilities on this panel today really set a new standard for performance, especially considering it was all done during a pandemic. We know customers don't like being without power for any length of time, which makes the topic of today's panel all the more important. We're working to return reliability and resilience to the grid. I'm happy to be here. Look forward to the discussion today and turn it back over to Erin. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thanks to all of you here. So one thing I wanted to start with, because I think it's an example of what the companies dealt with after the storm. So Alliant, ITC, and ZIPCO had a pretty dramatic effort to rebuild the Swamp Fox substation in Marion. So my colleague, John Steppe, who interviewed a couple of you, reported that this project usually would have taken 6 to 8 months, but your companies did it in just 6 days. I wanted to know what you learned from this project that can be applied to the future. May, do you want to start?
There we go. I got it. All right. So my first initial thought there would be just the value of these partnerships that we have with ITC, with ZIPCO. That was a joint effort. That was all of us working together. That was coordination. It was knowing what steps each one was going to take. So we were all prepared to restore customers when the time was right. So I would say the greatest lesson learned is that these partnerships are incredibly valuable. We continue to talk with each other. We did that throughout the storm. We've done that historically, and we'll do that going forward because it's going to always take all of us to coordinate well to execute on behalf of our customers.
Dusky, do you have anything to add there?
Yes, sorry, it's not allowing me to unmute myself. Yeah, I'd pick up on that comment as well. I think May's absolutely right. The collaboration amongst the utilities in response to the storm was key to getting power restored early on. And the Swamp Fox is a good example. SIPCO, Alliant Energy, ITC Midwest, we were engaged in twice daily calls throughout the storm response to really assess the damage, analyze what the priorities were, identify the areas that we thought we could get the largest number of customers restored with the minimum amount of work possible, and then dispatch crews out to those areas. And that's an area where we both, SIPCO and ITC Midwest both have transmission lines coming into that substation. Figuring out how we can work together to make sure that we get power restored to that substation that can then feed distribution to the homes and businesses in the Cedar Rapids area was key. And so making sure that we were working together, sharing equipment when possible, sharing crews when possible, with a focus on getting as many customers restored. So I think May's absolutely right. It's all about that communication and the collaboration, the cooperation amongst the utilities in time of emergency response like this.
That's great. It's great to know that you guys have those strong partnerships and that they can, when you need it and when times are desperate, that they work. I wanted to point out, so the Des Moines Register had a story earlier this week showing Alliant, although facing more outages in the storm, had fewer outside workers on the ground in the days immediately after. What factors into the kind of outside assistance utilities receive after a storm?
I'll maybe start there, and then May and Dusky can go in. Again, I think one thing is, as I said, you got to really look at those combined numbers of ITC and Alliant, because that is the whole system. It's just a different model there. Mutual assistance has been a stronghold of this industry long before I was part of it. I've seen it through every disaster. We also see it in our research and really innovation. So those requests go out, those crews come in. This wasn't like one restoration. For us, this was 256,000 restorations with multiple pieces. So they're brought in. I mean, literally, there's a timestamp of the first call that went out, but I think it was at 12-something p.m. on August 10th there. I'm sure MidAm, SIPCO, ITC all had similar. We're all trained to go out there and get those mutual assistance. So we had the crews. We obviously, as said, Cedar Rapids, there was hundreds of tree crews, including the National Guard, which I did have the privilege of being liaison with, was going through that. So we're very proud of the restoration. Again, all of us personally, all of our employees were dealing with it as well. We had many people going home after 18-hour shifts. As you know, it was also hard to house these crews. I mean, we used Prairie High School. We had a lot of people coming in from Waterloo, other places where we could actually have them get quality rest so they could be safely restoring. So maybe I'll turn it over to May and Dusky on that. But I think it's a lot of, it's sort of the numbers never lie, but there's always the story behind it and what was really going on. And just again would state, I think the industry, as always, stepped up to the challenge, and we all worked together. So May, maybe Dusky, if you want to elaborate, would be helpful.
Absolutely. So I would add, as Joel mentioned, that first call for mutual assistance was made very shortly after the storm passed through the Cedar Rapids area. And it's a call for resources. Who can you send? How soon can you send them? And as you all recall, there were some pretty significant storms on the East Coast that were happening or just kind of finishing up as this storm hit the Midwest. So Hurricane Isaias was one that had just passed through the East Coast, lots of resources that were out there. We called upon those resources, but to mobilize and get them to Iowa, that takes a little bit of time. So as that was happening from a mutual assistance standpoint, we were also calling on all of the resources within Alliant Energy that we could mobilize. Those in parts of Iowa that were not on the Highway 30 corridor that could come assist, along with all of the folks from Wisconsin that we could bring into our service territory as well. So those calls for resources were made immediately. We had folks that were not traditionally Cedar Rapids employees here that afternoon, starting on that restoration activity. And the days following, hundreds upon thousands of folks joined us just in Cedar Rapids. Across the service territory, I believe we had over 3,000 folks working on this storm. And again, that was just from an Alliant Energy perspective. As Joel mentioned, you really need to think about it for Alliant Energy plus ITC Midwest, because that's the distribution and transmission system. So you have to think about the collective number of folks between these two companies that were working together to restore power for Iowans.
Yeah, let's pick up there with ITC Midwest. We obviously jumped into action immediately and had crews coming in from across the country to work on the transmission system. And And in order to be a true comparison, you got to look at both transmission and distribution. I'm familiar with the article that you mentioned, Erin. I think there's other factors that need to be considered as well. The damage and destruction across the state was not uniform. And there was a lot of areas that were hit hard, a lot of widespread damage. And just take, the Cedar Rapids area, for example. As I understand it, they lost over 65% of their tree canopy as a result of the storm. When those trees come down, more than likely they're hitting power lines, whether it's just distribution or transmission. And so there's just a tremendous amount of destruction that was done to the system that had to be rebuilt. And that takes time. The other factor to consider is in terms of some of the responses, the power to the Cedar Rapids area was completely wiped out. Our headquarters had no power. The majority of our employees that work in the Cedar Rapids office are working from home. They didn't have power at home. They didn't have internet. And with the cellular networks towers being brought down, cellular networks down, it was difficult to reach some employees in those initial hours after the storm. And so the destruction was, it's hard to describe unless you're there and can see it, how widespread it was. And so that there are other factors I think you have to consider when looking at the response times and the restoration times across different utilities and across different areas of the state. From my perspective, I think every one of the utilities did everything they could to get crews in here as quickly as possible, get them dispatched to the priority areas and get power restored. And that's what I think our customers expect. And that's what I saw happen in the storm response.
Dan, did you want to add anything from, at MidAmerican, you guys, it looks like according to the article, according to those numbers, had more boots on the ground, in just the immediate days after, just compared to the numbers gathered from Alliant. What was that like? Is there any ideas that you had that you thought that this worked well this time around?
Sure. Also familiar with the article and also agree with the comments made. The numbers are the numbers. There's certainly stories behind the numbers, and damage was not uniform, although damage was certainly extremely widespread. I agree with what May had to say earlier on, that it was as bad as it was made worse by the fact that there was other national events going on that were requiring support from linemen and from tree clearing crews. And we actually had some of our own MEC crews out on the East Coast when this event hit. And so we had to, recall them and as well as request assistance from our neighbors, from wherever we could get crews from. We did have a bit of help from our sister companies out on the West Coast. So we had flown in some folks and had to ship their trucks to follow them. So it was definitely a logistics challenge to get crews available. Again, because of the large number of facilities that were affected, not just on our system, but widespread across the Midwest. So I think I'll also echo what Dusky said. Everyone had large challenges, but I think everyone rose to the challenge and in terms of serving their customers and doing absolutely everything they could to get the outside resources in, support the resources that came on site, because that is certainly a challenge to be able to use them efficiently and support all the logistics around that, and do whatever we could, work whatever hours were needed to get the lights back on, and again, serve our customers to the best that we could following a catastrophic event like this.
I wanted to switch gears a little bit. This is a question that's come in from one of our audience members, and one that I would echo too. Dusky reported about the thousands of power poles that had to be replaced after the storm. It leads to the question of whether it makes sense to bury more power lines underground, and wanted to ask the panelists about that.
Yes, and we have been from on the distribution side. May can probably give a little bit more. Again, I think it goes back to the key principles we use for every investment, be it lines, be it substations, be it office desks, be it computers. You know, we really have to balance reliable, safe, and affordable service for our customers. And frankly, this has been an industry trend really in the last few years where the cost has actually started to match overhead in a lot of places. And we've actually had programs where that comes through, but there's also, as with any technology, there's always other issues as well. But maybe you could go into a little bit more detail for the audience would be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Like Joel mentioned, we're putting more of our facilities underground. It's just an industry trend that price is coming to an equilibrium. But we can't do all of that overnight. That would come at a significant cost to our customers. So as we rebuild our system, we have a bias to put things underground, and we'll continue to do that. As folks know, it provides an aesthetically pleasing look, right? So that's great. And then additionally, from a tree trimming perspective, animals getting into those lines, you reduce some of those hazards. But what was phenomenal to me is that we still had underground cable that was damaged during this storm. We all saw those huge trees come out of the ground with those massive root balls, and a lot of times they were pulling up some of that underground facility. The other thing with underground that we have to keep in mind too is it's more susceptible to dig-ins. So there's costs and benefits to both overhead underground. I do believe though we will continue to stay focused on putting more of our facilities underground because it does bring some of that additional reliability. But we have to keep in mind that that's not going to be the solve for all of these types of events in the future. Like what we just saw with this storm, there's opportunity for some of that underground facility to get damaged as well. But we are moving in that direction, as Joel mentioned, and we'll continue to do that.
I'll pick up from a transmission perspective. You know, electric utilities are really in the business of balancing cost and risk. I mean, we can design a system with probably 99% reliability, but at what cost? And undergrounding power lines, particularly on the transmission side, often comes down to cost. In addition, they are a little more complicated to construct and certainly to maintain if there are outages underground. But those costs ultimately are borne by the customer and the consumer at the end of the line. And so we need to keep that in mind. You know, in terms of transmission lines, there's public studies out there that have costs ranging from 4 to 14 times more expensive to underground versus overhead. I would say ITC Midwest experience, we see about a 6 to 10 times adder for undergrounding transmission versus overhead. So it's within that range. But ultimately, you know, if there's a strong enough reason a transmission line needs to be undergrounded, we will do that. But typically the cost outweighs the benefits of it. And so that's why the majority of the lines that we build and operate are overhead.
And this is Dan at MidAmerican. I think maybe just circle back on the comments made to hopefully add clarification. So we have both transmission and distribution assets. So we share the sentiments of both ITC and Alliant, and the overall sentiment that we have to balance all of these different principles and our pillars of reliability and also the rates that our customers are faced with. So reliability certainly key and resilience certainly key. And the comment about the costs of overhead versus underground, we would agree that on the distribution system, those costs are becoming closer, and we are erring to try and put more facilities underground, both new and rebuilt facilities. At the present time, if we add up all the miles of distribution across our system, we're about 25% underground compared to 75% overhead. And that number continues to shift, but there is a lot of miles out there of existing, and we really want to evaluate where the problem areas might be and target those for possible conversion. On the transmission, though, I fully agree with Dusky. That cost is still quite different and quite a bit more expensive to go underground transmission as opposed to overhead. And we've not seen a lot of benefit in terms of the reliability. I think our transmission overhead facilities are very reliable, and they've got the benefit of being networked already. So we have multiple sources into our substations. And so it's pretty rare that, but you know, it is possible, as shown in events like this, that overhead transmission is impacted to this extent. But largely speaking, we're at about 1% underground on our transmission facilities without significant plans to try and change that. We continue to primarily build overhead transmission as the cost is a real factor. But our new construction, you know, is using technologies that I would say is more resilient in general to the weather impacts, even with events like this.
Now, you all have mentioned just the cost of putting lines underground, and I know just even all the repairs you've gone through here are also very costly, and you know, rate increases would affect all customers. But I know that some of your largest industrial customers are the ones that would see the bills go up, you know, the most, you know, if there were rate increases. What feedback are you getting from these large industries about their openness to a rate hike?
Well, I think it's pretty similar to any time we talk about pricing. They're very involved in the process. They always have been. At this point, I think everybody is just really focused on the reliability, the gratefulness of being able to be back into production, you know, making sure their workers are employed and productive and doing things. So I think it's a little early to tell, but I think they're industrial as well as all the residential, every customer. We all check our budgets. We check everything. We want value. And the good news is I think there's a process for this. There has been. And maybe the glass, I don't want to say half full because it's hard to say half full of something this disastrous, I think is really a realization of how critical the service we provide and the value is there. But more to come on that. But we have continued dialogue with the industrial customers as well as other customers. We feel they're part of our team.
Anything to add, Dan, on your from MidAmerican?
I think not a whole lot of additional comments other than rates are important to all of our customer classes, and we actively engage with all of our different customer classes to ensure that we're delivering value for them. And value obviously is comprised of many things. The cost of the reliability being important, just as the reliability itself. And our goal for a long time has been to minimize or eliminate rate increases and continue to build that reliability without impacting the price to our customers, whether it be industrial or residential or commercial.
So another question that's come up from our audience here. So some utilities like the Farmers Electric Co-op in Kelowna use microgrids. So in the storm, they were able to separate customer blocks and kind of minimize outages. To what extent are your companies using microgrids, and what opportunities are there to reduce widespread outages?
I think that's probably more, I think microgrids probably on the distribution side. So I think it's just like it's been our history for over a century. We really feel you need to have kind of all the above as far as your resources, and you put innovation in. I was thinking back when Dusky said about the poles they were replacing, they were a lot different than they would have been poles 20 years ago, 10 years ago. The same with all of our equipment. And we are working, and May can give some specific examples of feathering in microgrids. We also realize, just like any other production source or distribution source, they can have items too. We do know there were some solar installations that did incur damage. A lot of that I think was customer sides. I think most of ours were okay, but subject to check. And I think that was more probably geographic location than anything. Wind assets appeared to hold up really well through this, so forth. But so it's really a matter of making sure you have balanced and the appropriate redundancy back to making sure you can be reliable and safe, but also affordable. But maybe you can give them a few. I think there's a lot of newer stuff where we're working into this and utilizing it again for the benefit of our customers.
Absolutely. So we've got one operational microgrid up in our Wisconsin service territory. It was a small DNR facility that was going to cost us a solid chunk of money to extend line to. It was a line that needed to be rebuilt. So our team came back and said, how can we do this differently? And so we installed a battery, we installed some solar, it had a system. So that's really what comprises a microgrid, something that can store energy, something that can produce it, and something that disperses it to the user. And so we were able to do that at about half of the cost. And so we've got an active microgrid. It gives us the opportunity to learn how these systems all work together and how we can potentially scale that in the future. I think the one thing that we need to keep in mind is that the system collectively, the grid and how it works is providing benefit because we are all connected. We can share the infrastructure. We have systems and redundancy built within it today. And so disconnecting it and pushing it into microgrids would reduce some of that redundancy that we've built over the last hundreds of years, right? So I will say that we're actively looking at microgrids, what the use cases for those microgrids are, and we'll continue down that path because there is a place and a use for them in the future.
I just had a comment here. You know, microgrids are great for reliability. And again, it comes down to cost versus risk and how much are you willing to pay for reliability. Unless that microgrid is truly off the grid, it's still dependent upon a reliable transmission system in order to be cost effective. So if a community wants to have cost effective access to power, they need that transmission system to access market-based energy rates. And they also need access to the energy market to sell their excess non-dispatchable generation, whether that be wind or solar, back into the market. And so, and again, unless it's truly off the grid, there's still a connection to and a dependence on the transmission and the broader grid to help feed that reliability.
Dan?
Sure. At MidAmerican, I think we're in a similar stage as Alliant. I would say no active microgrids, but we do have a battery installation in the Knoxville area that we're same as Alliant. We're really trying to learn from that and how can we use that technology and help it benefit our customers for a variety of things, and certainly reliability being a focus. We certainly are very interested in, continuing to expand renewables, and we're looking at solar sites and how that might play in with batteries to kind of form some of these pockets. But 100% agree with Dusky that the overall reliability of the grid facilitates these microgrids and remains extremely critical for the overall reliability to our customers, and not just the transmission grid, but also the distribution grid, because all of these local microgrids are connecting at distribution levels. So those wires between the microgrid to the customers back to the transmission system still have a place and still have a huge role as we look forward, even in a realm where we expand the use of microgrids.
One of our attendees submitted a question. Here she says, both of our solar systems were damaged by the Derecho. We have a solar hydronic system for heating, wind damage, and panels for supplemental electricity. And they got tree damage. Both are still out for repair. They're wondering what kind of support systems can be built up to kind of help people who are trying to use some of these other forms of energy.
I think that's a continue to be evolving. The support systems are there. I think probably the analogy, and I apologize, many of you had heard me go through the meter socket demonstration on the press releases, but it's similar to that. A lot of these assets are customer-owned assets, I assume. So again, it's just like, who owns the repair of your roof and so forth. But it's very evolving. I think it's a combination of public, private, the policymakers and everything. There's been a lot of work. Iowa has. And I think from all indications, we still have the momentum to lead in renewables, clean energy, sustainable energy. And I think solar, batteries, wind, and, I don't know what, all the smart people and thoughts and the next generation is going to bring forward, but we'll be part of it. So I think really it's a matter of, again, back to what is, we believe, a very strong part of our industry is that collaborativeness that we showed through like mutual assistance. Hopefully has been demonstrated between ITC and Alliant with our close partnership, but also MidAm, SIPCO, everybody else. When we're looking at doing the best thing for customers and moving technologies forward, we all, I believe, look at it as how big is your team, and it's everybody. So I think there's a lot more there. I feel for those customers that are really out there trying to make a difference, experiment with stuff. So I think it's a matter of, these are infant industries and services, and I think we just need to build it like you would anything else that's new and cutting edge. And we're going to learn a lot from this and every other trial we get as we bring these into the system. But again, I close with that connection back to, that's a big part of what that grid and connectivity is. So you can have that backup and have the power even when certain assets are not available.
Does anyone else have anything to add there, just about how we can have more support for maybe some of these infant industries, as Joel said?
So we don't serve utility or retail customers, as I said, but I think, part of the lesson here is we learn from every storm and every new experience, right? And so a lot of, taking the transmission system as example, a lot of what we've learned over the years is how to build a much more resilient system, based on the experience that we have. And I can tell you, one example that we've done and that we've learned from is we now incorporate storm structures into our lines, which help to stop the cascading when an outage occurs. So when you've got a wire that breaks because of a tree or a grain bin blows into it, for example, that creates tension on those lines and pulls on down the line and causes greater destruction. What we've learned through the years to make a more hardened and resilient system is we put in what we call storm structures that are designed to withstand higher levels of that tension along the way to really stop and prevent that cascading effect in a system. And I think, whether you're talking about the transmission system, the distribution system, or even behind the meter generation, as was the question here, I think each one of these experiences allows us to identify how we need to continue to build on the technology of the system to harden it and make it more resilient going forward.
I wanted to ask, I know you had mentioned, Dusky, in your last response just about hardening of the system, and I've been reading a little bit about that, which is kind of just like what it sounds, basically upgrading with stronger materials. I wanted to know how expensive this is and to what degree are you doing it?
So I'll start since I brought it up. When you talk about how expensive it is, we look at it as a value proposition to our customers. I mean, we're here talking about a major storm with major outages, sustained outages. And to our customers, that's become more than just kind of a nice to have, electricity. It's now a need. And when you saw hospitals and care facilities, in our major communities that were without power for multiple days, that's becoming more and more of a critical issue. And so yes, we are looking at building more resilient transmission lines to make sure that these outages, when a major storm does come through, you can't build to withstand any type of storm, but you do your best to try and build the most resilient system. And it happens every single day of the year. And it's looking at your design standards to make sure that you're building them to sustain as much of those impacts, those weather impacts as possible each day of the year, not just when a storm hits. And so from a cost standpoint, again, you got to balance that cost and risk. We think there's value to our customers, and we hear it from our customers through that increased reliability. In the last 13 years, we've increased reliability and reduced the outages by 63% on the transmission side. And to an industrial at the end of the line, that's significant. When you have even a small outage, a small blip that interrupts their plant operations, that can be a major cost to their production. And so we see the value, we hear from our customers that there's value in hardening that system and making it more reliable and resilient.
A couple of things that I would add to that. As Dusky said, hardening the system happens every single day. So it's how we build going into the future. We talked a little bit about undergrounding the system earlier, right? That's just one example of how utilities, especially on the distribution side, are starting to make those changes to harden, make it more resilient, more reliable. So that's one example. We're also building to a 25 kV standard. That just means thicker, more insulated wire that provides additional protection. That again will happen over the course of the next 10, 20, 30 years as we rebuild the system as it's needed. So hardening happens every day. And then there are things like microgrids, the introduction of more renewables on our system that we will continue to look at and innovate on to incorporate into how we do things for tomorrow. So acting for tomorrow is one of the core values at Alliant Energy. We always have a focus on what the grid and our system and our company needs to look like into the future. And that's just very iterative. It's happening all the time. And the benefits that come alongside of that are realized by our customers on a daily basis as we continue down that path.
Dan, is there anything you'd add?
I would say that the other panelists have covered this pretty well from my perspective. We share the same thoughts there.
Okay. Briefly, I wanted to just ask the panelists what other ideas are being used out there, kind of even on the fringe, that you read about in the magazines, that you might hear about to make a grid more resilient. Something that we should be looking out for, or maybe it's going to be 5-10 years down the road. But what are some ideas there?
I think the one we haven't hit much on, and it's probably not any different than all of our customers are in our homes when you really think about technology and data, it's just so much more visibility and response time now in milliseconds that before would have taken a call, would have taken a truck roll, would have taken something. So there's lots of many things out there, both transmission, distribution, in our power plants, in our customers' homes, in our smarter meters, that really just give that better visibility to what's going on. And machine learning, all the techie things we read about that are part of this conference is going on. So that's probably the first thing that comes to mind. And then it's just the old making everything better and learning every day about it. Sometimes it's your processes, sometimes it's the materials. It's often that combination and that that human energy and creativity that makes the difference.
I pick up on a concept that's already been happening. If you go back, 12, 15 years here in Iowa, we very much had a baseload generation model for electric generation, where you had kind of central station power plants, whether it was coal or the Duane Arnold Energy Center, which is nuclear, and then backed up with natural gas. And so you had a system where the generation was centrally located, and then a lot of transmission distribution to get it out to where the load is. Over the last 12, 15 years, we've seen a evolution towards a more distributed model of generation. Wind and solar and more dispatchable natural gas are replacing a lot of those kind of central station baseload plants, Duane Arnold being, the most obvious recent example. And having that generation located closer to load increases reliability, increases resiliency of the system. Now, it does require a new type of transmission system so that you're interconnecting all of that, all those rural wind farms and solar panels, but it does allow that generation to be located closer to load, which ultimately increases overall reliability of the system.
Well, I think we're going to have to leave it there. Unfortunately, we just run out of time here with this panel. I'd like to thank May and Dan, Dusky, and Joel for joining us for this great discussion about rebuilding the power grid. I know the Gazette will be covering many of these developments as we go forward with these, projects in Eastern Iowa. So the next panel in the energy environment tract is at 11:15, and it's on water quality, which is one of my favorite topics. So come on back. I want to thank everyone again, and I hope you all have a good day.
Thank you, Erin.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.